If I were to mention a film about the Titanic, the vast majority of you are going to immediately picture the 1997 film by James Cameron. King of the world, painting French girls, all of that, good stuff, great movie. But some of you also may think of A Night to Remember, a film from 1958 that is said to be a more historically accurate depiction of the incident. However, both of these movies are just two of the depictions of that tragic April night, and we can use this entry to go back to the beginning, just 31 days after the Titanic sank. On May 16, 1912, a film entitled Saved from the Titanic debuted in New York City, the first film to depict the ship sinking. The film starred Dorothy Gibson, a well-known American actress who was actually on board the actual Titanic. Dorothy was on vacation in France when her film company, Eclair Film, called for her return to New York City to begin a new production. So, she boarded the Titanic in Cherbourg, France to get back home. On the night of the sinking, Gibson was playing a card game with fellow passengers, including her mother. The card game went into the night, and they wanted to finish it before they went to bed, which ended up saving her life. Because at 11:40, the Titanic struck an iceberg. Dorothy described the sound as a long, drawn, sickening scrunch. Upon hearing that noise, she saw the deck begin to fill with water, and she and her mother went to a lifeboat. Them, along with 27 other people, were launched into the Atlantic Ocean at 12:40, the first lifeboat to leave the sinking ship. They sailed away, the screams of terrified passengers becoming more distant as the lights of the ship dimmed. Nearly 6 hours later, the RMS Carpathia saved the lifeboat occupants and took them to New York City. Just a few days later, did Eclair Films approach her about making a movie depicting what happened. Of course, starring her, someone who just survived the Titanic. At first, Eclair Film just made a newsreel, which was spliced together footage of the Titanic's captain, John Smith, the arrival of the Carpathia in New York City, and stock footage of icebergs. This newsreel was popular, which furthered interest in an actual film, again, starring an almost victim of the Titanic. Gibson was on board, intending her role to be a tribute to the ones who lost their lives in the wreck. Production took place in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and it only took a week, as the producers wanted to make this film as fast as possible, while the actual disaster was still in the headlines. And headlines was what this film was aiming for. The film producer knew this would stir up controversy and discussion alike, so they went full throttle, promising this to be an authentic retelling of what happened, delivered by an actual victim who would be wearing the very outfit she wore on the ship when it went down. The movie was released in the United States on May 16, 1912, again, just a month after the ship sunk. It had a running time of just 10 minutes, which was typical for the time. The film was well received for the most part, indeed audiences praised it for its accuracy. But yes, there were detractors who thought this was way too soon and solely made to secure a quick buck off the backs of people who lost their lives. The film affected Dorothy Gibson as well, certainly inducing PTSD in her, even if it wasn't called that yet. She would only do one more movie before retiring. Today, we cannot see the first ever Titanic film, as it was unfortunately burnt. A studio fire in 1914 saw the last copy of Saved from the Titanic being burnt. However, this wasn't the only Titanic film made in 1912, again the same year the ship went down. Next up was a film in Germany, which was entitled Nacht und Eis, or In Night and Ice. It was also released in that same year of 1912, and it is also missing. In France, a film called La Hantise, or The Obsession, was released in October of 1912. A short film about a woman who goes to a palm reader, only to be told her loved one would soon perish. And she tries to stop her husband from getting on the Titanic. This film is partially found, giving us the oldest look at a Titanic movie. After a month and a half of fighting, France would ultimately fall to the German army on June 25, 1940, a major step on the Axis path to a total conquest of Europe. After the nation fell, a man named Charles de Gaulle demanded that the nation should keep their fight up. He was recently promoted to the rank of Brigadier General by the French Prime Minister, Paul Reynaud. Following France's defeat, Reynaud resigned his post, and a man named Philippe Pétain became the then French Prime Minister. He immediately vowed to sign an armistice with Germany. De Gaulle opposed this and fled for Britain, where he was met by Winston Churchill. Due to the fact that de Gaulle wanted to keep fighting, Churchill gave him permission to stay in Britain and attempt to sway the French public opinion against peace talks. To do this, de Gaulle was given permission to broadcast a message on the BBC's radio system. It was here, on June 18, 1940, where de Gaulle would deliver his address, hoping to sway public opinion. It was said he spoke for 4 minutes, pleading for the French people to stand up against the German army. I'll read from it. It was the tanks, the airplanes, the tactics of the Germans that surprised our leaders to the point to bring them to where they are today. But has the last word been said? Must hope disappear? Is defeat final? No. As we can see, the speech was recorded in a written sense, but there are no recordings of the actual audio that survive, and it's for a very simple reason. No one cared. This speech wasn't announced to the public, it just took place on one random June afternoon. Also, no one knew who this de Gaulle guy was. He was just a random French general who just showed up in Britain one day and started yapping on the radio. Of course, this speech didn't sway much opinions because it was only broadcast in Britain, not the nation he was appealing to. It was said that only 300 French citizens volunteered to go back and fight. However, 4 days later, on June 22nd, de Gaulle gave a much more important and well-known and far-reaching speech. This one was actually broadcast in France, and it is commonly pointed to as the first step in de Gaulle's real fame, and the first step of the French resistance during World War II. Consequently, it is often confused for the Appeal of June 18th, but they are different speeches entirely. During the winter of 1604 going into 1605, 11 plays were performed for the English King James I. They were performed by the same acting company that employed William Shakespeare, the King's Men. 7 of these plays were written by Shakespeare himself, and 2 were written by Ben Jonson. But the final play is a little more mysterious. It was entitled The Spanish Maze, and that's the only thing we know about it, other than the fact that it was performed on February 11th, 1605. In the reports of performances from that time frame, no author or plot details of the play were recorded, just its name. Some people believe that The Spanish Maze was actually an early version of another play by Shakespeare entitled The Tempest, but there is no way of knowing for sure. We just know some unnamed play was performed and it must have not been very good because it wasn't notable enough to be recorded. Something else I have a genuine interest in, but I fear is overdone and overcovered, is comic lost media. Of course, coming from both DC and Marvel. I find these early drafts and looks and now staples of pop culture interesting. But again, I try to make videos on stuff that hasn't been covered extensively, and I feel that DC and Marvel lost media is already at that point. As always, if that's something you'd like to see, let me know and I'll do it. But for now, we will discuss a piece of Marvel lost media that I had never heard of. The original design for Spider-Man. Back in 1962, Marvel had a hit on their hands with the Fantastic Four, and Stan Lee was on the hunt for their next big hero. Stan knew a majority of their readers were teenagers, so he wanted to make a teenage superhero. He would later claim that he couldn't get an idea straight, until he saw a spider climbing on his office wall. And then it hit him, Spider-Man. He went to Marvel with the idea, and after some back and forth, it was agreed that Spider-Man could be in an issue of Amazing Fantasy. A series that wasn't selling well, but had a focus on both supernatural and science fiction stories. So with his approval to make Spider-Man a reality, he approached Marvel artist Jack Kirby with the idea, asking him if he could draw a design. Kirby agreed and later presented the first draft to Lee, which had a man who was wearing a half face mask, exposing his mouth and jaw, while wearing a blue shirt and pants with red gloves and underwear on the outside. And the most notable difference from later Spider-Man designs, he had a gun, which would shoot his web fluid. Lee didn't really like this idea, and he passed off the duty of bringing Spider-Man to life to Steve Ditko. And Ditko gave us the standard for Spider-Man designs that has lasted even into today. While that's all well and good, we can't see what could have been that gold standard. The original draft drawn by Kirby was not saved, and it's likely only a handful of people saw it. Now we fast forward to 2012, when this image surfaces online, being emailed to multiple comic blogs at that time, which certainly fits that description of what Kirby drew, but this thing was quickly proven to be a hoax. The base of this drawing came from a Tales to Astonish comic, and it was modified to look like Spider-Man. Regardless of it being a hoax, it is our closest look at what Jack Kirby's original design for Spider-Man looked like. When radio was in its infancy, a man named Vadim Sinyavsky helped popularize it across his country. His career spanned between 1929 to 1971, meaning he commentated on several important world-shattering events. In 1929, as he graduated college, he was hired by the All-Union Radio Company, and they began to broadcast soon after, with Vadim at the helm. He already had an interest in sports, meaning he was the prime choice to commentate over the nation's events. He commentated on several categories, including swimming, gymnastics, and one of his personal favorites, chess. Even though chess was his favorite to cover, he got his fame through soccer. His broadcasts were energetic, and he never took a side in the match, leading to many people at home stating they felt they were right in the stands watching the match unfold. Unfortunately, the fun and games would cease for a bit, as war was on the horizon. On June 22nd, 1941, Sinyavsky was en route to Kyiv to broadcast a soccer match. But these plans were cancelled as Germany invaded the Soviet Union that very same day as a part of Operation Barbarossa. He still went on the air and announced the news that the match was cancelled and that the Soviet Union was now at war. This gave Vadim a new job, a war correspondent, and his first post was his birth city of Sinyavsky. A battle there began on July 14th, 1941 and lasted for months. Sinyavsky stayed the entire time, giving daily updates as to what was going on, even remaining behind after Germany took over the city. Vadim made it out and was set to report on the Battle of Moscow, which took place months later. One notable broadcast during this time frame was the November 7th Parade, an annual event that commemorated the October Revolution of 1917. Vadim used this broadcast to inspire hope in the Soviets under fear of German occupation. We could go on for a lot longer about every broadcast he was a part of, but just know he covered all of World War II and had a career for 30 years afterwards covering more sporting events. As for any radio broadcasts from that time, the technology to save and store them wasn't present yet, already leading to potential loss. But there's another reason why Vadim's broadcasts aren't available today. They were destroyed, intentionally. A man named Sergei Lapin became the new chairman of the nation's radio and television broadcasts, and he wasn't a fan of Vadim. So he ordered most of his recorded radio broadcasts to be destroyed, stating they held no artistic value. In mere moments, 40 years of radio history was destroyed by jealousy, leaving little behind today. As a part of Argentina's last dictatorial rule, the government began to censor many books, and public demonstrations would be held where these books would be burnt. Anything featuring any trace of left-wing ideology was burnt, including a book called La Cuba Electrolitica, which is Spanish for the electrolytic cell. What leftist ideology is present in this book, leading to it being banned? None. It was an engineering book for students studying that major. However, if we look at that name again, La Cuba Electrolitica, the Argentine generals believed this to be a book on the actual nation of Cuba, which was a government ran on leftist ideals. This led to the book being burnt and subsequently lost. There are no surviving copies of this thing at all traces of it are gone. We have no idea what the actual contents of the book were, how long it was, who wrote it, nothing. It's just reported in the newspapers and first-hand accounts of those who lived in those times. This is the type of historical lost media I love. Stuff insanely important to history that has been missing for thousands of years. We can now talk about a work written by Eratosthenes of Cyrene, an ancient Greek mathematician and geographer. The work in question is On the Measurement of Earth, the first published piece of text that calculated the circumference of the planet. Eratosthenes was a well-rounded scholar, serving as the head librarian at the Library of Alexandria. But this isn't what he's best well known for. He is best well known for calculating the circumference of the Earth. He did this over 2,000 years ago, and he documented his work on a research paper again titled On the Measurement of Earth. I'm not much of a scientist, but I will try and explain how he did this. During the summertime, Eratosthenes noticed that the sun wasn't casting shadows over the city of Cyrene. He later went to Alexandria, a city 500 miles away, and noticed that the sun was casting a shadow of about 7 degrees. From here, with that known number of 500 miles, or 5,000 stadia in their times, and knowing that 7 degrees is 2% of an entire circle, or 1/50th of an entire circle, he combined this information and calculated that the Earth's circumference was 250,000 stadia, or 25,000 miles. The actual circumference of the Earth is 24,901 miles. Eratosthenes was 99 miles off from calculating the exact circumference of the Earth. This has survived, but the rest of On the Measurement of the Earth is missing. I'm not sure what else would be in this text, the most important part survived, but yes, it's only a fragment. If there's something I've become obsessed with while making YouTube videos, it's lost silent movies, or more generally, early film history, when the industry was just beginning, and directors were having to adapt with the available technology to make the movies they wanted. But sometimes, these directors would push too hard, resulting in tragedy. This entry is actually a very early sound film, which featured spoken roles, music, and sound effects. The film in question is 1928's Noah's Ark, a film we have parts of today. The film was about the actual biblical event, serving as the film's climax. I don't really get why this film exists and is titled as such, as the actual Noah's Ark story is like a flashback and it's barely in it. But anyways, that's not what's important. During the climax of the movie, the biblical flood takes place, and again, this is a movie being made in 1928, way before computers. If the director wanted a flood, he had to make a flood, and that's what was done. Massive water tanks were filled to the brim, amounting to a total of 600,000 gallons of water that were dumped onto the extras below. As they tried to flee, they were knocked around and thrown all over the set, which unfortunately ended in the lives of 3 people being lost. Several others were injured. Included in this injury list was a young John Wayne, who was working as an extra on the movie. This scene was left in the film, and we are able to watch it today. But let's talk about what is missing. The film at release was 135 minutes long, but it quickly gained backlash. People complained about the sound, as it was not mixed well compared to other sound films at the time. And there was something else wrong. Scenes of the extras drowning were left in. Warner Bros. Pulled this movie and cut out a half an hour of it before sending it back out to the theaters, where it was beloved. It made $1.2 million domestically and an additional $938,000 in worldwide sales. But for those 30 minutes that were cut from the movie, they were never seen again, but the rest of the film would be re-released several times, meaning we have it today. In 1897, Abraham Stoker made horror history with his novel Dracula, the origin of the now classic vampire story. Stoker took inspiration from the original folktales of vampires, while adding in his own ideas that would later become tropes. One such idea is the fact that vampires need invited into one's own home before entering. and that they do not show up in reflective surfaces. All of this was put forward in the 1897 book Dracula. But before that book came out, Bram Stoker had an original vision that we cannot see today. In 1980, almost 100 years after the original book was published, a family discovered something in their barn. Located in northwest Pennsylvania, the family found a set of writings attributed to Bram Stoker, entitled The Undead. Upon reading through it, this was discovered to be an original draft of Dracula with some major changes throughout, including a volcano eruption at the end. It's not known how this thing ended up in Pennsylvania. Stoker did spend some time in America, but not specifically the state of Pennsylvania. Also, the manuscript starts on page 102, and it's not known what was in the first 101 pages. The manuscript opened with Jonathan Harker's train ride across the country to Dracula's home, which is the starting point for the actual published story. Stoker would publish more short stories with the Dracula character in the early 1900s, leading some to believe that they were parts of the original manuscript, but what exactly was in those first 102 pages is not known. We have another piece of ancient Greek lost media, and this entry focuses on a man named Praxogoras. We don't know a lot about him. All the information we do have comes from another historian, Photius I, who wrote in his famous book Bibliotheca about how cool of a guy Praxogoras was. Photius details 3 pieces that Praxogoras wrote about: the King of Athens, History of Constantine the Great, and Alexander, King of Macedon. A total of 8 books that made up these 3 collections. Constantine the Great is his most detailed work, as Photius spent a great deal discussing how well Praxogoras wrote about him. But we will never see how good of a writer Praxogoras is, as everything he ever wrote is now missing. Long before the 1960 John Wayne film, another director attempted to bring the story of the Alamo to the big screen. The director in question was Gaston Méliès, brother of the famed movie director George Méliès, another staple in both film history and in lost media history. Gaston was asked by George to expand their movie-making business to America, both to distribute the films made by George and to make his own movies of American icons. And one of the first movies he made was the Immortal Alamo, the first time the iconic battle was brought to the big screen. The movie was filmed on scene at the actual Alamo building in San Antonio, Texas, and this is about where the historical accuracies end, as the film was a dramatization of the actual events, and things had to be cut up and moved around as the actual film was only 10 minutes in length. This led to some negative reviews, as some found the film incredibly underwhelming. The action was left a lot to the imagination, even if 500 extras were said to be a part of the film. Regardless of how good or accurate the film was, we can't watch it today. It is completely lost. Un Bon Bock, French for a good beer, is one of, maybe the oldest, pieces of animation ever made. The film was made by Émile Reynaud, and it was first screened on October 28, 1892, 130 years ago. The film was made over a period of 4 years, and work first began in 1888. The film consisted of 700 individual paintings that made up a running time of 15 minutes. This was just one of 3 films that Émile made, and 2 out of 3 of them are missing today. For the third film, Pauvre Période, only 4 minutes out of the total 15 remains today. This is due to Émile himself, as he faced a bout of depression, which led to him destroying most of his work. His copies of film were tossed into the Seine River, leaving the oldest pieces of animation lost today. In a desperate attempt to stay relevant on the world stage, the British has the royal family, who dominate headlines every time one of them breathes or goes to Chipotle. Me personally, the only day I cared about the royal family was September 8th, 2022. But people have cared about the royals for a while, and we can now discuss a piece of royal family history. This entry was the first time the royal family was filmed. The Prince and Princess of Wales, Edward and Alexandra, along with their children, were paying a visit to the Cardiff Industrial and Fine Art exhibit. This was an art show taking place in the Welsh city, and it was said to be filmed by Burt Acres, an early pioneer in the world of film. Also notably, this film was recorded with 70mm film, not the more common 35mm film. The footage was said to include the royal family walking to the exhibit, escorted by guards, before they enter the exhibit. That's it. That's the film. Acres planned to show the film later in the year, but first held a public screening with the royal family before it was sent off to the public. And it was beloved. All 4 royal family members were said to be seen clearly, and Prince Edward personally praised Acres for his work, and he was requested to record more royal events in the future, which helped him with his reputation at the time. Today, nothing survives, a story similar with a lot of Acres' work. During the Cold War, every world leader was looking for dirt on the other, and one of the superpowers at the center of this was the Soviet Union. This entry will focus on the efforts to blackmail the first president of Indonesia, Kusino Sujiwoharjo, also known as Sukarno. The major players of the Cold War wanted Indonesia on their sides, and Russia was especially aggressive in their recruitment methods. The current premier of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, saw the value in having Indonesia as a partner, as they were a highly populated, semi-local communist country. However, Sukarno and the Soviets didn't see eye to eye on several issues, so the Soviets became a little more aggressive in their approach. They invited Sukarno to Moscow for a meeting, and he accepted the offer. While on board the plane to Moscow, the Soviets sent a flight attendant to spend some time with Sukarno, and they certainly did spend time together. This was filmed by the Soviets. When Sukarno landed in Moscow, he was taken to the meeting spot, only to be shown the tape of his incident with the flight attendant. This was an attempt to blackmail him into complacency. Sukarno did not fall for this. He watched the tape multiple times and asked for copies of it to be sent back with him to show off in his home country. Their blackmail failed. The United States heard this plan and attempted to do it themselves. They hired actors to play Sukarno and a female flight attendant, and photos were taken of this pair together in bed. The plan was to mail this picture worldwide for publication to post, which didn't end up happening. It was said the photos were sent to Indonesia, to which the public celebrated Sukarno while mocking the CIA for this lousy attempt. Regardless of both of these blackmail attempts, these stories are mostly rumors with very little backing. Neither the tape or the photos have surfaced today, despite rumors of the photos being circulated around Indonesia. Ernest Hemmingway was one of the most famous writers to ever live. His best well-known work is probably The Old Man and the Sea, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and A Farewell to Arms. I personally love that one, the book where the guy falls in love with a nurse during World War I. Great story.
So there's no way you've read that.
But for all the famous works of Hemingway, there are some stories we cannot read today. In December of 1922, Hemingway's wife Hadley was traveling with a suitcase of his, filled with all of his works of fiction he wrote. Unfortunately, this suitcase was stolen and was never recovered, leaving a big part of Hemingway's history lost to time. Let's discuss another early pioneer in the world of film, Vittorio Di Maio. He was an Italian film director who moved to Brazil, where he began to make movies. This was according to newspapers at the time, as we know practically nothing about this guy, and in said newspapers, it's mentioned he streamed these films on the 1st and 6th of May 1897, and a total of 21 films were streamed. This is the only thing we know about him and the movies. They are all lost. If this story is true and accurate, it makes them the oldest Brazilian films to ever be screened. In 1843, Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, a now classic story that has been adapted into film several times. And just like Saved from the Titanic and the Immortal Alamo, we can now discuss the first film adaptation of A Christmas Carol, which is now lost. The film was released on December 9th, 1908, and ran for 15 minutes, and it was a hit. It was reviewed well, saying it was a welcome change to other films being released at the same time, as they were more concerned with violence. The film follows the typical story of A Christmas Carol. The ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future visit Ebenezer Scrooge and tells him to stop being so sad all the time, and he becomes happy immediately. but no copies of the film exist today. There's not even stills or production material. This next entry is a major step in the world of film, being the first ever movie to be shown to a paying audience. This film was made on May 4th, 1895. It was an experimental film made of two boxers, young Griffo and Charlie Barnett. The scene was filmed on top of the Madison Square Garden building and was shown off to audiences 2 weeks later. Boxing films were popular in this time, as they were much easier to film compared to, say, baseball. Also, boxers were incredibly famous at the turn of the century. Since film was in its infancy, saving copies wasn't really a thing yet, meaning the first ever film that an audience paid to see is now missing in its entirety. And we have a third and final piece of Greek lost media. This piece was written by Pythias of Massalia, and was composed in the 4th century BC. The book in question was Things About the Ocean. This was a work written by Pythias as he traveled the ocean, seeking information on what was above Greece. He traveled for weeks and landed at a spot he called Thule, today believed to be rather Iceland, Norway, or Greenland. He continued further north from this, hitting the Arctic. He then turned back around and went back home to Greece. He documented his travels in a book called On the Ocean, and we only have parts of it today. The rest of it is missing, and some believe it may have also been burnt in the Library of Alexandria. Just as we're ending September, heading in October, why not end this video with an appropriate topic for next month? This is a piece of horror film lost media, the first ever horror parody film. The film we are discussing is The Golem and the Dancing Girl, which was parodying a film released 2 years earlier called The Golem. We don't know a lot about it besides that. It's been lost for a while as the film did not generate much press at release. There is no footage of it available today, but we do have a cast list, production stills, and posters.